Welcome to episode 48 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week I speak with Geoff Hill, an Irishman who, with just 30 miles of riding experience, set out from Delhi to Belfast on, of all things, a Royal Enfield, 7,000 miles. Other trips followed, including retracing the first ever motorcycle trip around the world. That trip happened in 1912. On top of all this, Geoff Hill is also the most capped volleyball player in Irish history, whatever that means. But first, a word from our sponsor. Picture this: you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, don't fret, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got simply everything: brake rotors, lights and tire, exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Let me start at the beginning and how I first sort of became aware of you. And that is the ride that you replicated that Carl Stearns Clancy did in 1912. Can you take us through? Because that's a really great story. And it's also great about how you found out about it, how you were tipped off to this. And then take us through that. And then you went and replicated this. Anyway, to you.
Yeah, I got an email one day from Dublin, that's Dublin in the south of Ireland, biker who said, "Geoff, I've read all your books, loved them, and it's coming up to 100 years since an American biker called Carl Stearns Clancy, as you said, was the first to take a bike around the world in 1912, 1913, and because his parents, he was American, but his parents were Irish, so he started in Dublin. And this guy, Peter O'Neill, said a bunch of us are planning to replicate the Irish leg of Clancy's journey from Dublin up to the northwest and then to Belfast, from whence Clancy went on through Europe and the rest of the world on October the 23rd, 2012. Which was the 100th anniversary when Clancy set off. And he said, Fergal O'Neill was his name. He said, we'd love you to join us. And I said, yeah, Fergal, I'd be honored to. And I sent the email, and then I thought, you know what, I have never heard of this guy, Clancy. So I did a bit of Googling, as journalists call research these days, and discovered that he had, in fact, taken a bike around the world in 1912, 1913. He didn't ride all the way, because there simply weren't roads, but he did a fair bit of it. I mean, it was an astonishing achievement for the time. He was only 21, 22 at the time, when you think you're invulnerable. But, you know, he'd no real maps, no idea what he was getting into. And it was an astonishingly courageous thing to do. There's an American biker called Jeffrey Fraser, who's written several bike adventure books and been around the world himself several times. And Clancy had written a series of articles for an American magazine at the time, but and he planned to turn them into a book. But I think when he got home, the trip was so tough, I think he gave up biking. As far as I know, he never rode a bike again. But Gregory Fraser collected all the articles and the photographs on them.
So you're saying that after this trip in 1912, Clancy got home and never rode again?
I've no information that he did. Yeah, I think he was pretty much fed up with motorcycling by the time he finished. And ironically, when he got, he took the boat from Japan to San Francisco and then rode a northerly route across the states up through Portland and Washington State, and he thought, "Thank God, I'm back in the States. Everything will be easy." And the roads in the USA were the worst of the whole trip, which really put him off for life. But Gregory Fraser put all his diaries and photographs into a book, and I bought the book, and I was only about 40 pages into it when the 40-watt bulb went off above my head, and I thought, you know what, it would be brilliant not just to do the Irish leg, but to do the whole trip and follow the journey that Clancy did. And through Gregory Fraser, I tracked down a guy who, when Clancy died in Virginia in 1971. He and his wife had no kids, and his housekeeper gave his diaries and photographs, his pith helmet that he got in Egypt, and the boots that he wore on the trip to the 16-year-old son of neighbours, who is now a professor at the University of Western Australia. So I emailed him and I said, "Listen, have you got all this stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm just about to pack it all up and send it off to the National American Motorcycle Museum in Iowa." And I had this mad idea. I said, "Do you fancy sending me Clancy's boots? And I'll take them around the world a second time, because I'll be riding across the states and I'll deliver them to the museum in Iowa." And he said, "Yeah, sure, what a great idea." And about 2 weeks later, this box arrived from Western Australia. And I must say, opening it up and seeing these 100-year-old boots that had been around the world was tingle down your spine time. So I took those around the world and left them at the museum in Iowa.
For our third inning stretch, some words provided by our sponsor. Picture this: you're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts that you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease, and because you're committed to riding that thing farther than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I could also use some brakes and be a shock. This baby deserves an air filter. So you head straight back to eBay. You can find any part you need there. It's surreal, from headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've been fantasizing about. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And now you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit, because eBay knows that DIY fixes can be major and mods are always incredibly, irrevocably intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in, wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, don't fret, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than life itself, and that is, of course, riding your bike. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly where you start with eBay. Minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back in the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay, in its large S, created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see that green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. Well, now that you know all this, just imagine standing at the open garage door, looking at the bike you love more than life itself, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that humanity has never seen. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Now back to my conversation with Geoff Hill. When you decided you were going to replicate this trip, what were you looking for? And the reason I ask you this is that there's kind of a quip amongst photographers that, a lot of photographers in the American West will go to Yosemite or these other great American vistas. And the quip is that they go looking for Ansel Adams tripod holes. They're trying to essentially replicate exactly what they've seen. And of course, it's used derisively. But what were you looking for? And did you find it?
I think specifically to see how much had changed or not changed in 100 years. And obviously, a huge amount had, but quite a lot in the American Midwest. I found little towns and villages that really hadn't changed an awful lot. Instead of a Model T Ford parked outside, there was an SUV or a Tesla, but the actual shops and the way of life hadn't changed at all, which was quite remarkable.
It's inconceivable to me that you could do something like that, at that point, to go around the world. And I mean, he wouldn't have really had a reasonable chance. I would have thought of making it home alive. I mean, he really was, think of the state of communication in those days. I think at one point he had to avoid India because there was no fuel. I mean, just things that are just unbelievable.
Yeah, he met someone in Italy, an Englishman, who said, A, there's no fuel, India, B, there are no roads, and there's a fever epidemic at the moment. So he did avoid that. So, yeah, I mean, he had no way at all of knowing what he was getting into. So, and he did carry a gun with him, which I don't think he could do these days, although he didn't need to use it. But I think he found the same the same thing as well. That if he was stuck, people would help. I think the only people he didn't help and with whom he got extremely pissed off were shipping agents and border guards, which are still probably the big barrier to any motorcycle adventure these days. So,
well, thank God nothing's changed in 100 years.
Well,
Anybody with a badge, stand back.
well, I found it border crossings, especially in South and Central America, just keep smiling and be patient. I think Mexico has a saying that it teaches the impatient to be patient and the patient to be impatient. And I can well understand that because it takes about 3 hours to get through any sort of typical South and Central American border crossing.
Well, you made reference to another one of your trips, and where you went from Delhi to Belfast. Now, I was just in Delhi in the spring and rode a Royal Enfield around Delhi, which just riding in the street there has the intensity of racing. I mean, it was incredible. The cars come at you from every angle, as you know, and of course there's cows and monkeys, and then up the shoulder of the highway comes the gas tanker truck in the wrong direction, and I mean it is pure sort of glorious insanity. And you, without much experience as a motorcyclist, I believe, went to Delhi, met up with a mate, and then rode back to Belfast, 7,000 miles. What prompted you to make that trip?
There were several glasses of wine involved in the decision to do this.
I should hope so.
With my good friend Paddy Min. Yeah, I mean, my dad and my uncle used to race motorbikes back in the 50s. And then Dad had a pretty bad accident when I was 8. Rather ironically, not racing. He was just riding up to the local village on his Norton sidecar to get some groceries, and his bank manager, of all people, drove out of a side road and clobbered him and left him with pretty bad head injuries. I assume they dealt with overdrafts more severely in those days, but Dad had to get into the business and never rode again. And I was only 8, so I was sort of too young to really get into the whole thing. So, no, I only got my test in 95, 96 when I was 40. And then 2 years later, Paddy Min, who was an old friend I'd known for years and who was a proper biker, came around, and we had too many glasses of wine one night, and as a result, 5 months later, we found ourselves sitting in Delhi. And I'd only done my test a couple of years before, and I'd literally only done about 30 miles on a motorbike in my life. And I remember looking at the traffic in Delhi and thinking, what in the name of God have I got myself into? And you're right, it seems incredibly scary, but somehow it sort of works, it all sort of flows around you. And when we crossed the border into Pakistan, that made India seem like Switzerland in comparison. It was utterly chaotic. But yet again,
so there's worse than New Delhi?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. I mean, at least in Delhi, they pull out in front of you politely and then have the grace to apologize. But in Pakistan, it is just utter chaos. Although, having said that, and here's an interesting thing with the current dichotomy between the alleged Christian and Muslim worlds, the hospitality in Muslim countries like Pakistan was just astonishing. I mean, they say hospitality to strangers is one of the central tenets of the Muslim faith. And then Iran, which was the next one, which we knew very little about. I mean, this was back in 1998. But the Iranians were just brilliant, really, really brilliant people, especially young people. But even then, they were just so fed up with the regime because they weren't allowed any secular, non-religious music or dancing or movies or anything. So it was just an incredibly boring life. And that was during the 1998 Soccer World Cup. And we were in a little village up in the northwest of Iran. on the night that Iran played the USA in that World Cup. There was only one TV in the village in the lobby of the little, well, guest house really that we were staying in. So everybody in the village had piled into the lobby and were watching it. And when Iran finally won 2-0, the landlord said, tea for everyone. So we all had free tea and to celebrate the win. Although I was very glad to get into Turkey and finally have a beer after all the way through Pakistan and Iran without, especially at that sort of temperature, you know. There were times when I was riding through Pakistan, as I said, it was 51 degrees at one stage, and in Iran it was typically sort of 40 plus. And I was that guy in every beer advertisement in the world dreaming of a cold pint with those little droplets of condensation on the outside. So yeah, it was great when I finally had one.
I have a theory, and I want to bounce this off you. And my theory is that, and I think this, although I've not done epically long trips like you have, and like many that I've interviewed on this podcast have, but I have this theory that depravity is a necessary precursor for pleasure. So as my father used to say, you know, why was the man banging his head in the wall? Well, the answer, of course, is because it feels so good when he stops. And I think that, you know, this notion of like what you're saying, just riding in the heat and the, you know, you don't know where you're going to go, you don't know where you're going to spend the night, and then armed bandits with the big guns, and then you just survive, or you find a bed, or you find a beer, and it really is. It's just unbelievably pleasureful, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the worse the day, the better the reward when you get to the end of the day. And it may be that, I know we talked before we started about stuff, you know, and maybe it's a male thing, or maybe it's not, but I think quite a lot of us, you know, when you're a kid, you get on your bicycle and you go out and have adventures in the summer, and then as you get older, you start accumulating all this stuff, you know, the houses and the possessions and that lovely record deck you've got behind you and all that stuff, and you think, you know, all this stuff defines me, but you know what? It doesn't really. And on a motorbike trip, you know, all you can take is the stuff you can carry with you, and the panniers or a top box or a bag in the back. So you've got very little stuff, and yet you're having this amazing quality of life every day. You're waking up and you're heading up down the road, and you haven't a clue what the day will bring, and it's so different to ordinary life. And it may be that, as Bruce Chatwin said in the songlines, that he had this theory that people were essentially nomadic by nature, and it was only when we stayed in one place and got tied down by what somebody else called the tyranny of possessions that we get sort of vaguely disgruntled, but we don't know why. And it's only when we get up and go that we feel truly satisfied. I don't know what your thoughts on that are. Or...
I think so. And I can't think of anything in my life that I've gotten rid of that I've regretted. Even, you know, things that I coveted and things that I dragged from flat to house to over all these years, and made sure they didn't get, you know, wrapped them in bubble wrap. And then at some point, you know, I set it on the curb and it disappeared, and I was glad to see it go. And yeah, these are things I thought that I couldn't live without. And I mean, often I think perhaps I lack the courage to get rid of things, because I do I like nice things. I like the courage, but sometimes I wish everything just burned to the ground. You know, saved a couple of pictures of my daughter when she was young, and that's about it. But even that, you know, at some point, I mean, my father said, since we're on this topic, my father said to me, you know, when I was young and overly and aggravatingly fastidious about things. And he said that, you know, everything you own will just end up at an estate sale on the table, and somebody's going to give the auctioneer $1.50 for it. So, I mean, that's ultimately everything behind me. That's its fate, and I know that. So, yeah, I think that, you know, and the beauty of travel by motorcycle for me, and not that I've gone as far as you have, but just even a weekend away or a week away, is that you wake up and you know what you're doing that day. And there are very few unwelcome surprises because we're at home, we get a phone call, we got a job, which is great, but then we have to figure out how to do it. But when you're on the road, you get up, you eat, you pack, you go. It's kind of beautifully simple, isn't it?
It is beautifully simple. Although, funny enough, I feel sort of the opposite. That in your everyday life, if you're going into the office or whatever you're doing, you sort of know what every day is going to bring, and heading off on an adventure, certainly a big trip. That I do a lot of preparation, a lot of research, so that I know the history and the culture of everywhere that I'm going to. But you still don't know exactly what's going to happen every day. As I found when I crashed in Colombia, for example. And it's very liberating, that, and scary. It's a bit scary and liberating. But I think you're right. Talking of dads, my dad was, one of the world's worst hoarders. If you asked Dad, what'll I do with this broken shoelace? He'd say, put it in the attic. It might come in handy someday. And when he finally died, my brother and I, when we cleared out the family home, we were dreading what we'd find in the attic. I mean, we found a set of Canadian canoe paddles up there. Go figure. And all my old school reports, which were mostly could do better. We took so much. I mean, we recycled as much stuff as possible, but an awful lot of stuff just went to the dump. And I remember thinking, all this stuff, it's just stuff, really. And maybe we spend the first half of our lives collecting stuff, and then the second half getting rid of it, down up to the point. There's a Swedish word which I've forgotten for. It's called death cleaning, where you just get rid of stuff because you know that you're going to die at some stage, and as you say, it's going to end up in a garage sale afterwards. Or there's another guy who's written a book called Die with Nothing, which is the same sort of theory that just get rid of all the stuff. You don't need it, and it doesn't define you. So that's life sort of that.
But the trouble is you get rid of that second pair of underwear, and then you hang on a little too long, and so and then you're left in this underwearless situation, and that's when your wife leaves. We're gonna circle around back to this your trip from Delhi to Ireland, and I read some reviews of the book because the second half of the book, you go across Route 66 in America on a Harley, and some of the reviews, both the pundits on Amazon and the sort of the bike press, love the first half of the book. We're sort of ambivalent about the second half of the book. What do you think that is? Is it just, was there not enough in your face to make it difficult in the second half of the book? I mean, what do you see now in that book when you look back on it? And do you think those criticisms have any validity?
I think they do a little. Yeah, I mean, the first half, as I said earlier, I had very, very little motorbike experience. So everything, and in a way, I mean, a lot of my life has been travel writing, quite apart from the bike stuff. And in a way, travel writing is cheating a bit as a writer, because you're waking up somewhere new every day, and it's like being 5 years old again. You're walking around going, wow, look at that, and gosh, look at that. And it's like being born again. So I mean, the Delhi to Belfast trip was a bit like that. Everything was just completely and utterly new and astonishing and exciting, which made it sort of easy to write about in a really fresh and vibrant way, I hope. The Route 66 one, I mean, the Route 66 trip was just incredibly easy in comparison, easy to organize, and no real dramas at all. So yeah, I mean, Aristotle said 2,500 years ago that every story has a introduction, conflict, and resolution, and there was much more of that every day in the Delhi to Belfast one, whereas Route 66, which it was a much easier one, really. And I think that's probably reflected in the opinions of people who read it, that the first trip was more difficult and dynamic and interesting. Having said that, I mean, Route 66, if anybody's watching or listening and they haven't done it, it's fabulous. You know, my wife and I just started going out with Kate, who's now my wife, in 2000 when I did the Route 66 trip. I was away for a month doing it. First, it was a newspaper series, and then the second half of that book. And I'd always wanted to go back and do it with her. And last September, we did it in an RV over a couple of weeks. And it was really interesting to see that I think about 85 or 90% of it's still there. And a lot of the old diners and motels are still there and doing pretty well in tourist traffic. And it's still a really emotive experience, just waking up every morning and setting off west to California in the promised land. So if anybody out there hasn't done it, do go for it. Okay, but yeah, so I think to answer your question, yeah, I think that's why people weren't as engaged with the Route 66 one as the Delhi to Belfast one, because it wasn't as difficult or dangerous or demanding or exciting, I guess.
Although these days, it could be just as exciting.
It could be.
I guess we'll stay away from that topic, won't we?
Yeah. Although, I mean, sorry. Yeah. No, I was just going to say, as I said earlier, you know, people are essentially good, and you know, I mean, we all know what's going on with the States at the minute. But you know what, the people were brilliant. Several times we were stopped. Pardon me. And folks would come over. They'd get out of the car and come over and say, "Are you folks lost? You look lost." And the one time near the Grand Canyon, pardon me, we were waiting to cross the road, and this giant V8 pickup rolled up with several Trump stickers on it, and we thought, "Oh, here we go." But the guy stopped and waved us across, you know. So, as I said earlier, what you see in the media doesn't necessarily really bear any relation to just how decent, normal people are, which is a good thing.
I mean, one of the most significant, or maybe I think the greatest benefit of any kind of travel, and you, as you said, you're a long time travel, very successful travel writer in the UK, and aside from this motorcycle slumming that you do, and but it really is you only have to go to a couple of different countries, and then you go, aha, I get it. We're all pretty much the same schmuck, just trying to make a go of it. It really is. It's no more sophisticated than that, is it?
Not really. Yeah, everybody. I mean, you maybe I've just been lucky, you know, but and not met any bad characters. But I think generally in life you get, with possible exceptions, that you get back what you give out, you know. And if you travel with a good heart and keep smiling, especially at border crossings, that you'll get that back. Whereas if you travel with suspicion and you know, looking for the worst, then that's exactly what you'll find. As an example, quite a few people said, you know, with the particularly in the Chile to Alaska trip, you're always going to get stopped by cops looking to get a few dollars off you. But the only one time that we were actually asked for money was we were stopped by the roadside. Clifford was filling up fuel with his bike from a jerry can, and a couple of traffic cops pulled up and stopped us. I mean, we were stopped quite a lot by cops and army, but generally they were just curious, you know, what we were doing, where we were going, how fast the bikes went, blah de blah, the usual stuff. But this time, these two guys came over and they asked us the usual questions, and then one of them said, Clifford said, "Can I take a photograph of you guys with the bikes?" And so they stood arms crossed and fixed their moustaches, and Clifford took the photograph. And then one of the cops said, "And now you need to pay us for the photographs." And I said, "Okay, here we go. How much do you want?" And one of the cops said, "Would $1 be okay?" And I said, "Yeah, $1's fine." And that was the only one time that we were actually asked for any on the whole trip. You know, having said that, there were a couple of times cops stopped us, and you know, they took all the luggage apart, and it was pretty obvious that they were waiting for us to say, "Okay, how much to get you guys to go away?" But we we just stood around and looked stupid, which was remarkably easy. And they finally got bored and disappeared. But no, back to my fundamental point, I think unless you're unlucky, people are just generally pretty good all over the world, which is a very heartening thing in the current situation.
The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. You seem like a man who can't hold down a job, because you also, in addition to all your travel writing and your motorcycle work, you are also the editor of Microlight Flying magazine. And I've always thought there was an interesting parallel between flying and motorcycling, because of the way you corner, which is similar. You know, the weight is taken down through the center of the body, unlike a car where you're inelegantly shoved over to one side or the other. So I thought they're really very similar. Of course, the only difference being that when your motorcycle quits, you coast to the edge of the road, and when your plane quits, that's a whole other set of issues. Do you see parallels between motorcycling and flying, and do they give you a similar feeling?
Yes, yeah. I think there is, particularly. I mean, there are two types of microlights or ultralights. They may be known of in your part of the world, but one is fixed wing, which are just like small light aircraft, where you generally sit inside and you control the aircraft with a stick, with a joystick, a control stick, and rudder pedals. The other type are flex wings, which developed from hang gliders back in the 70s and 80s, and somebody had the idea of sticking an engine on the back. And those are the ones with the where you sit in a pod suspended from a triangular wing, and you steer by basically shifting your body weight with an A-frame. And the flex wing guys, they're pretty much all bikers as well. Maybe to a greater extent than the fixed wing guys. You know, they first of all they're in the open air. They need to wear sort of suits because it can get pretty cold, and they wear helmets as well. So there's quite a parallel there between flying and biking. And I think the sort of ethos behind both is pretty similar. You know, you need to learn how to do it properly. There's a bit of an element of overcoming danger and I suppose overcoming fear as well. You know, I mean, there are times now when if I haven't been flying for a while for whatever reason, work or the weather hasn't been great, and I'm driving to the airfield thinking, oh, I'm not sure if I want to do this, you know, but it's like everything once, and it's the same with the bike trips, you know, like I remember waiting to cross the border into Colombia, and I was scared. I really was, in spite of myself. And the same with the Balochistan desert, you know, wondering, what is this really stupid and dangerous? But in general, well, two things happen if you're afraid. I think, first of all, the things you're afraid of, they either don't happen or they're not as bad as you think they're going to be. And also, because you were afraid and still went ahead, you feel much better for having done so. So I think there is that common element to both motorcycling and flying. So yeah, that's a good question, and yeah, I think there is a commonality between the two.
Before we go on, I have to go back to the tale you were telling me of getting stopped in the desert. I mean, that's just so good. I mean, you must have. So take me through that story again, and let's dwell on that for a second. So you're with your mate. You've left India, going through Pakistan.
Yeah, the Foreign Office had said don't go through the Balochistan desert, which is the bit of southwest Pakistan, which is just south of the Afghanistan border, and they'd said you're almost certain to be kidnapped and possibly shot by the world's most well-educated bandits, young Pakistani guys who went to mostly the UK. They got degrees, they went home, and they had no jobs, so they just turned to kidnapping and smuggling. But we had no other way to get to the Iranian border, so we were riding along one day. It was 51 degrees centigrade, which was interesting, and we ran out of fuel. And we were standing there late in the afternoon wondering what to do. And these two guys come out from behind a sand dune with Kalashnikovs, and I don't know what Paddy was thinking, but what I was thinking was, I want my mum and I want to go home, and I wish I'd listened to the Foreign Office. But they came over, and one of them said in a very polite voice, "Hello, chaps, do you need some fuel?" And I said, "Well, yes, we do, actually." And they pushed the bikes around the dune, and there was this sort of Mad Max village of huts and all these smuggled cars and motorbikes and drugs and ammunition. And they filled up both tanks, charged us about $1, and sent us on our way with a cheery wave. And after that, that sort of firmed up my belief that actually people are pretty good everywhere, and it also solidified the decision between Clifford Patterson, the guy I rode from Chile to Alaska with, that we would go through Colombia, even though the advice was even more, don't go to Colombia or you'll be kidnapped and shot.
So why did they sell you fuel, and why didn't they shoot you? I mean, it's almost, I mean, was it are Royal Enfields really that undesirable?
Well, these were the old Enfields Bullet 500s, and they were the old style ones where kickstart and the gear was on the right, and the old British fastening upside down. And I mean that was before Enfield, before Royal Enfield really turned their fortunes around under
Yes.
Siddhartha Lal and became the huge company they are, making absolutely brilliant bikes. But on the ones we had, I mean, they were only 856 pounds, like maybe $1,000 new out there. But every single thing that could shake and rattle and fall off did, often several times a day. I remember I was riding through Istanbul, and I heard this clatter and looked around, and the horn had fallen off. And in northern England, close to the end of the trip, I got off the bike at the end of the day, and the air filter had become completely detached from the bike, and it was leaning against the key down on the right hand side, which was the only thing that was keeping it on board. But you know what? They got us home, yeah, slowly but surely, and just as long as we made sure to tighten every single nut and bolt on them every single day.
How long ago was your last big trip by motorcycle?
By motorcycle, the Clancy one, which was 2013. So, and I had an idea for another one. There's a thing called the Mongol Rally, which you may or may not have heard of. About 20, maybe 25 years ago, two young English guys got drunk in the pub one night. There's a bit of a theme developing here, and they decided to drive their Fiat 127, which is a little dinky car, to Mongolia. And they didn't make it. The car broke down, but they had such a good time that they decided to do it the year after with a few friends for charity. And it's grown and grown over the years. The two rules, and they've raised a lot of money for various charities, but the two rules are that the car's got to be under 1,000 cc, and it's got to cost under £1,000. Things like Citroen 2CVs, or increasingly Nissan Micras, for example. So you make your own way out, and then the cars are left there for the locals to use or whatever, or you can drive them back. So I sort of thought of that as the first part of the trip, and then the second one going to the Ural factory, where Urals, the bikes that, if you believe the stories, were Russian copies of 1930s BMWs, which are still being made to this day, and to ride one of those back from the Ural factory in Russia. And well, obviously that's not feasible at the moment, and may not be for some time, but that's the sort of idea I've had for another one. Africa's one place I really haven't ridden through at all, but for some reason it doesn't appeal to me. I know other riders like Sam Manicum have absolutely loved it, but yeah, I don't. I've ridden in sort of northern Africa and down in South Africa, and been in Namibia, and those are both fascinating. But The rest of it, yeah, it just seems like an awful lot of hassle, especially at Borders, and I probably had enough of that. Also, I'm 68 now, and in the words of Charlie Glover and that movie with Mel Gibson, I may be getting too old for this shit.
Geoff Hill's books can be found, like everything else, on Amazon. And please note the spelling of his name. It's Geoff. In closing, words from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. Well, it's okay, because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.